Yes, I
Okay.
can.
And you can hear me. Okay, we're in business. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank Melanie, which I said last week, but nobody could hear me, and the DCGIA for inviting me to speak tonight. And thank all of you for coming back a second time. That's a vote of confidence. So tonight I'm going to talk about the oldest profession in the world. I think you know what I mean. Courtesans are women who curried sexual favors to rich and powerful men, reach far back into history and every culture. The term courtesan originally referred to a female courtier, which means a person who attends the court of a monarch or another powerful person. Prior to the Renaissance, courtesans served to convey information to visiting dignitaries, which was not trusted to servants. In Renaissance Europe, courtiers played an extremely important role in upper class society. As it was customary during this time for royal couples to lead separate lives, commonly marrying simply to preserve bloodlines and to secure political alliances, the royals would often seek sexual gratification and companionship from people living at court. In fact, the verb to court originally meant to be or to reside at court, and later came to mean to behave as a courtier, and then finally to pay amorous attention to somebody receiving luxuries and status in exchange for companionship. Today, we use the term courtesan as a euphemism to designate an escort or a prostitute. By contrast to today's definition, courtesans of the 18th and 19th centuries were usually well-educated and worldly, sometimes even more so than the average upper-class woman. And in the 19th century, they often held simultaneous careers as performers or artists. They were typically chosen by men on the basis of their social and conversational skills, intelligence, common sense, and companionship, as well as their physical attributes. It was usually their wit and personality that set them apart from other women. They were prostitutes in the sense that sex was one of their obligations, but unlike the average prostitute, sex constituted only one facet of their array of services. For example, they were expected to be well-dressed and ready to engage in a variety of topics ranging from art to music to politics. In some cases, courtesans were from well-to-do backgrounds. They could even be married, but their husbands were on a lower social scale than them. So having this rich client actually helped their husband as well. It brought them up to a higher social status. So the husband was often aware of the wife's profession. However, an unmarried courtesan was solely dependent on her benefactor, and that made her very vulnerable. In France in the late 19th century and for a brief period in the early 20th century, courtesans had reached a level of social acceptance in many circles and settings, often even becoming the friend and confidant to the wives of their benefactors. They also became famous in Paris society and beyond. But first, let's go back to the 18th century. This is Jean Antoinette Poisson, otherwise known as Madame de Pompadour. She was a member of the French court and the official chief mistress of Louis XIV from 1745 to 1751. She remained influential as a court favorite until her death. At the age of 19, Jeanne Antoinette entered into an arranged marriage with the nephew of her guardian, who initiated the match and the large financial incentives that came with it. Once they married, her husband fell passionately in love with her, while she maintained that she would never leave him for anybody except the king. In 1744, Jeanne Antoinette sought to catch the eye of the king while he led a hunt in the forest. Because she lived in an estate near this location, she was permitted to follow the royal party at a distance. Excuse me. However, wanting to attract the king's attention, she drove directly in front of his path, one day in a pink carriage with a blue dress and another day in a blue carriage with a pink dress. This prompted the king to send her a gift of venison. The king's current mistress died that year, and this allowed Jeanne Antoinette to become the new mistress. As you can see, she's got the king's portrait on her wrist in this bracelet, and that signifies the bond that they held. Jeanne Antoinette was able to wield great influence at court due to the invaluable role she played as friend and confidant of the king. She was also a great patron of the arts. Of interest to us is that Madame de Pompadour was a collector of engraved gems, and she was also an engraver of gems. She was taught by Jacques Quay, who was the royal engraver of the king. She would carve little scenes and cameos into semi-precious stones like carnelians and topaz for rings and bracelets. To make a permanent record of the gems, Madame de Pompadour had artists draw them for her, and then she learned to make etchings from the drawings. This is a picture of one of the engravings that she made, and it's after a drawing by Boucher after an engraved gemstone by Jacques Quay, the official engraver, 1755. The illustration is of Leda and the Swan, a story and subject in art derived from Greek mythology in which the god Zeus, in the form of a swan, seduces, or in some versions actually rapes, Leda, who was the wife of the king of Sparta. The subject became especially popular in paintings in the 16th century, and there were also significant depictions in the decorative arts. This medallion that we see here that shows Leda and the Swan was actually made by Benvenuto Cellini early in his career. It's now in a museum in Florence. It was a private commission meant to be worn as a hat badge. But it does seem to me that this was a rather risque subject for Madame de Pompadour. Louis XV remained devoted to Madame Pompadour until her death in 1764 at the age of 42 from tuberculosis. Her successor was the Comtesse du Barry. Her name was also Jeanne. You're going to hear a lot of Jeannes in this story for some reason. Her name was Jeanne Becqueux, Comtesse de Barry, and she became the last official mistress of Louis XV. She was born in Lorraine in 1743 and was the illegitimate daughter of Anne Becqueux, who was a seamstress, but supposedly very beautiful. At the age of 15, Jeanne left the convent where she was educated because she had come of age. To support herself, she wandered the streets of Paris selling trinkets and possibly working as a low-level street prostitute. Jeanne was a very attractive woman with thick golden hair in ringlets and almond-shaped blue eyes. Her beauty came to the attention of Jean-Baptiste du Barry, a procurer of women. Du Barry installed her in his household and made her his mistress. Giving her the appellation of Mademoiselle Lange, Du Barry helped establish Jeanne's career as a courtesan in the highest circles of Parisian society, which enabled her to take several aristocratic men as lovers. One of those men was the dashing Marshal Richelieu, the king's best friend. Du Barry saw her as a means of influence with the king, who became aware of her in 1768 while she was on an errand to the palace in Versailles. However, she needed a title to be moved into the sphere of the court, and this was solved by her marriage to Du Barry's brother, Count Guillaume de Barry. The marriage ceremony included a false birth certificate created by Du Barry himself, and very conveniently made her 3 years younger and of more noble descent. Jeanne was installed in the palace below the king's quarters and was presented to the court on April 22nd, 1769. She was wearing a queenly silvery white gown brocaded with gold and was bedecked in jewels sent by the king the night before. Her courtly dress had large panniers. Now, this is not her dress, but I wanted to explain what panniers are to you. They have some kind of structure underneath. It could be made from wood or whalebone or metal or reeds. And the wider your panniers were, that was a sign of your wealth. They got bigger. The people in the court said that they had never seen anything like this dress before. And her hairdo was also noticeably spectacular. And that was blamed as the reason that she arrived late at court, because it took so long to do her hair. You might remember that at this time, they were wearing those big, huge hairdos. Just a word about panniers, because it's interesting. Very difficult to sit down with them in your dress. And you took up about 3 times as much space as a man. Jeanne was a huge triumph. She now wore extravagant gowns of great proportions, both in their design and cost. I may have skipped a slide. Let me just go back. Yes, I did. I'm sorry, I skipped a slide. She now wore extravagant gowns of great proportions, both in design and cost, exhausting the French treasury. With diamonds covering her delicate neck and ears, she was now the king's favorite mistress. And here we see 2 pictures of her. None of her jewelry is actually extant, as far as I know. She quickly became accustomed to living in luxury. Unlike her late predecessor, Madame de Pompadour, she had little interest in politics or culture, preferring to pass her time ordering ravishing new gowns and all sorts of complimentary jewelry. Suppliers would come every day to offer her pieces. While Jeanne was known for her good nature, she grew increasingly unpopular because of the king's financial extravagance towards her. Her relationship with Marie Antoinette, who was married to the king's son, was contentious. In 1772, the infatuated king requested that Parisian jewelers Baumer and Besson create an elaborate and spectacular diamond necklace for Madame du Barry, one that would surpass all known to others in grandeur at an estimated cost of what would be the equivalent today of about $8 million. Not bad. The necklace was still not completed nor paid for when the king died. And what I'm showing you here are recreations. The actual necklace doesn't exist anymore. When the king died, Madame du Barry was quickly exiled from the palace when the king's son ascended to the throne and Marie Antoinette became queen. The money the jewelers had spent to make the necklace almost bankrupted them, which led to various unsuccessful schemes to try to sell it to Marie Antoinette. The necklace consisted of many large diamonds arranged in an elaborate system of festoons, pendants, and tassels. The jewelers hoped it could be a product that the new Queen of France, Marie Antoinette, would buy. And in fact, in 1778, the new king offered it to his wife as a present, but she refused it. So I wanted to mention that I think it was maybe about a year ago, there's a new company that was formed taking the name of Baumer and Besson, making diamond jewelry. And they sold a piece at auction, a necklace that went for $7 million and earrings that went for $13.5 million. Huge diamonds. I think they sold at Christie's. According to Marie Antoinette's lady-in-waiting, the queen refused it with the statement, this necklace, with the statement the money would be better equipped building a warship. It's said that Marie Antoinette disdained the necklace because she did not want to wear any jewel which had been designed for another woman, and especially if that woman was a courtesan she disliked. After having tried in vain to place the necklace with a buyer outside of France, the jewelers again attempted to sell it to Marie Antoinette after the birth of her son, Louis Joseph, in 1781. The queen remained uninterested. The necklace would eventually trigger a scandal in which Queen Marie Antoinette would be wrongly accused of bribing Cardinal de Rohan, Archbishop of Strasbourg, to purchase it for her. And let's find them. Okay, so that's Marie Antoinette and the Cardinal. The accusations would figure prominently in the onset of the French Revolution. The story goes something like this. It's somewhat complicated. We have yet another Jeanne, a con artist known as Jeanne de Lamotte, conceived of a plan to use the necklace to gain wealth, power, and royal patronage. She became the mistress of Cardinal Rohan, that we see here, who was the former French ambassador to Vienna. The cardinal was regarded with displeasure by Queen Marie Antoinette because her mother was the Austrian Empress, Marie Theresa, and so she knew him from his time at court in Vienna, and she did not approve of him. Despite being a cardinal of the Catholic Church, he lived in a scandalous manner. The cardinal hoped to regain the queen's favor, and de Lamotte persuaded him that she had been received by the queen and had her ear. Rouen resolved to use Jean to get back in good graces with the queen. She assured him she would work on his behalf. Thus began an alleged correspondence between Rouen with someone he thought was the queen, but was really Jean de Lamotte, pretending to be the queen. The tone of the letters got very friendly, convincing Rouen the queen was falling in love with him. He begged for a secret night meeting with the queen, which took place on August 1784. But the person he thought was the queen was really a look-alike that Jean de Lamotte had hired. You can't make this stuff up. De Lamotte then convinced the cardinal in a letter that the queen wished to purchase the famous necklace, but wanted him to do it for her because she didn't want the public to know about the expenditure. And he carried out the deed gladly. The necklace was delivered to de Lamotte, whose husband took it apart and sold the stones. When the jewelers did not get paid, they complained, and the truth came out. Rouen showed the letter he believed to be from the queen, but unfortunately for Jean de Lamotte, she signed the queen's last name, and royals never sign their last name. So it was proved to be a forgery. Rouen stood trial, but he was acquitted. De Lamotte was arrested, and from what I read, I think they were actually going to brand her in some way, but she managed to escape. Marie Antoinette was proven not to be involved in the scheme of the affair of the necklace in any way. She and the king actually asked to go to court so they could get acquitted and people would know they had nothing to do with it. But the public still saw her as a self-aggrandizing person at the expense of the French people, and further added to anti-Bourbon sentiment. This all contributed to the French Revolution 4 years later. Although Madame du Barry had nothing to do with this situation, she would come to a sad ending. In 1792, du Barry was suspected of financially assisting emigres who had fled the French Revolution, and in the following year, she was arrested and accused of treason. The Revolutionary Tribunal of Paris condemned her to death, and she vainly attempted to save herself by revealing where she had hidden gems, but to no avail. On December 8, 1793, du Barry was beheaded, and this is a engraving of her going to the guillotine. She was killed in the Place de Révolution and buried in the Madeleine Cemetery, like many other victims of the Terror, ironically, including Marie Antoinette as well. Although her French estate went to the Paris tribunal, the jewels she had managed to smuggle out of France to England previously were sold by auction at Christie's in London in 1795. Our next courtesan is Josephine Boharne, who was the first wife of Napoleon I and the first Empress of France. She was born in Martinique, a French-controlled island, to a wealthy family that owned a sugar plantation. The family struggled financially after hurricanes destroyed their estate in 1766. Her aunt arranged an advantageous marriage to Alexander de Beauharnais, who lived in Paris. In October of 1779, Josephine traveled to France with her father and married Alexandre that year, and they had 2 children, a son named Eugene and a daughter named Hortense. It was not a happy marriage and led to a court-ordered separation. During the Reign of Terror, the Committee of Public Safety arrested her husband, and he died at the guillotine. Considering that Josephine was too close to the counter-revolutionary financial circles, she was also arrested. She was extremely lucky because she was freed 5 days later, thanks to the fall and execution of Robespierre, which ended the Reign of Terror. Josephine was described as being of average height, shapely, with silky chestnut brown hair, hazel eyes, and a somewhat sallow complexion. Her nose was small and straight, and her mouth was well formed. However, they say she kept it closed most of the time because she had bad teeth. She was praised for her elegant style and beautifully modulated voice. After her first marriage, she had affairs with several leading political figures. In 1795, she met Napoleon Bonaparte, who was 6 years younger than her, and became his mistress. Napoleon was from Corsica, and upon joining the army, During the years of the French Revolution, he quickly rose to the rank of general by age 24. While away leading a military campaign, he wrote the following to her. I awake full of you. Your image and memory of last night's intoxicating pleasures has left no rest to my senses. He soon proposed to her, and they married on March 9th. Upon meeting Bonaparte, she was known as Rose, but he preferred to call her Josephine, and she adopted that name from then on. This is her engagement ring, Toi et moi, you and me, which sold in 2017 for $950,000. The marriage was not well received by Napoleon's family, who lived in Sardinia. They were shocked that he had married an older widow with 2 children. 2 days after the wedding, Bonaparte left to lead the French army in Italy. During their separation, he sent her many love letters. In one, he wrote, you to whom nature has given spirit, sweetness, and beauty, you who alone can move and rule my heart, you who know all too well the absolute empire you exercise over it. And I wonder if that use of empire was foreshadowing. Josephine, left behind in Paris, began an affair with a handsome lieutenant. Rumors of the affair reached Napoleon. He was infuriated, and his love for her diminished somewhat, but was not gone. In 1798, Napoleon led a French army to Egypt. During this campaign, Napoleon started an affair of his own with the wife of a junior officer who became known as Napoleon's Cleopatra. The relationship between them, Josephine and Napoleon, was never the same. She had no subsequent lovers, as far as we know, but Napoleon had affairs with several other women. Nonetheless, they remained married despite their troubles. In 1799, Napoleon seized political power, and in 1804, he crowned himself emperor, and Josephine became empress. This is a painting of their coronation, officiated by Pope Pius VII, and it took place at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. Napoleon first crowned himself, then put the crown on Josephine's head, proclaiming her empress. As empress, she performed the role of ambassador and hostess, organizing receptions, entertaining visiting dignitaries, and representing the emperor at official functions, and reviving something of the old ceremony of the royal court. For this role, she dressed in beautiful gowns and stunning jewelry, often wore in parures or matching sets. The style of dress previous to Napoleon's reign had been women wearing cinch waists, big skirts with petticoats, and corsets underneath, and made of heavy fabrics with elaborate embroidery. When Josephine came to the throne, a new style came into fashion, named Empire because it came from the rule of Napoleon as the first French empire. It was intended to idealize Napoleon's leadership of the French state. This neoclassic, and you can see the dress, this is the Empire style. The waist comes up under the bust. This classical style was adopted for its association of ancient Greece and classical Republican ideas. The renewed fascination of the classical past was encouraged by the recent discoveries in Pompeii and elsewhere. And Napoleon had a great interest in them. So we see a lot of cameos during his reign. Also, intaglios were popular as well. Inspired by neoclassical tastes, the short-waisted dresses sported soft, loose skirts and were often made of white, almost transparent muslin, which was easily washed and draped loosely like the garments on a Greek or Roman statue. Since the fabric clung to the body, revealing what was underneath, it made nudity a la grecque a centerpiece of public spectacle. I think I missed one again. Let's see. No, I guess that was it. Okay, so this tiara she's wearing up in the corner here, that was a wedding gift from Napoleon, and pretty fabulous pearl earring she's wearing. And this tiara here was actually a gift from her brother-in-law, who is Napoleon's sister's husband. Let's see. The bridal tiara consists of countless pearls and 7 cameos that depict mythological figures. When Josephine's granddaughter, also named Josephine, married King Oscar I of Sweden in 1823, she relocated to Stockholm and took this tiara with her. The current Swedish Queen Sylvia has on occasion worn it to the Nobel Prize Gala dinner. And the Swedish Crown Princess Victoria actually wore it for her wedding in 2017. Josephine had a lot of jewelry, major jewelry, and she seemed to particularly like sapphires. And this is just one of many necklaces that she owned. And you can see, much like Georgian jewelry of the time, that these big necklaces filled in the space in the neck where the dress was a little more low cut. Within a few years, it became clear that Josephine could not have another child. Napoleon was still in love with her, but he began to think very seriously about the possibility of divorce. The final die was cast when Josephine's grandson, Napoleon Charles Bonaparte, who had been declared Napoleon's heir, died of croup in 1807. At dinner one night in 1809, he let Josephine know that in the interest of France, he must find a wife who could produce an heir. From the next room, Napoleon's secretary heard her screaming. She agreed to the divorce so that the emperor could remarry in hopes of having an heir. The ceremony for the divorce took place in January of 1810 and was a grand but solemn occasion. Each read a statement of devotion to each other. On March 11th, Napoleon married Marie Louise of Austria by proxy for the purpose of creating an heir, and a formal ceremony took place at the Louvre in April. Even after their separation, Napoleon insisted Josephine retain the title of Empress. He said, "It is my will that she retain the rank and title of Empress, and especially that she never doubt my sentiments, and that she ever hold me as her best and dearest friend." After the divorce, Josephine lived at the Chateau de Malmaison near Paris. In March 1811, Marie-Louise delivered a long-awaited heir to whom Napoleon gave the title King of Rome. Josephine died of pneumonia 3 years later, 4 days after catching a cold during a walk with Tsar Alexander in the gardens of Malmaison. Despite his numerous affairs, eventual divorce, and remarriage, the emperor's last words on his deathbed at St. Helena were, "France, the army, the head of the army, Josephine." And this is a recreation of her dressing table at Malmaison, which you can visit. I'm just going to take a sip of water and we'll move on. So now we move into the 19th century. This is a picture from the later 19th century of a coquette or courtesan entertaining not one, but 3 men. Called Les Grands Horizontales, or the demi-monde, the Second Empire and the Belle Epoque Paris courtesans often became celebrities in their own right. Even actresses like Sarah Bernhardt were courtesans in between stage roles. Many women were fleeing bad marriages, had been ruined financially, and turned to prostitution because it was better than the alternative, poverty. A courtesan could be kept by one or several protectors during the course of her career. She would only stay with a lover if he could provide her with a certain standard of living. If not, she would move on to someone else. The career of a courtesan was often short as she got older and her looks faded, and younger, fresher women took her place. So many courtesans tried to make the most of their time, racking up jewels, houses, and expensive wardrobes. As Alexandre Dumas said so indelicately, women were luxuries for public consumption, like hounds, horses, and carriages. Now, this article, this is Liane de Pouget, who was a very famous courtesan. We're not going to go into depth about her tonight, but she's well known. And she had fabulous pearls, and they were stolen. And you see the headline here, "Mysterious Theft of Mademoiselle Liane de Pouget's Famous Pearls." This article appeared in the New York Times, which is testament to how famous these courtesans were. It was big news if they had a theft, but to make it all the way to the New York Times is pretty amazing. And in the story, which I don't really think you can read, It describes her pearls as a king's ransom, 368 pearls of the finest quality. And it also says in the article that thefts from courtesans' jewelry were quite common. Susan Griffith, in the book of the Courtesans, said that a courtesan was proud of her jewelry, and she was also proudly displayed. She was expected to accompany her various lovers to public places and events, cafes, restaurants, balls, parties, the theater, opera, and even host gatherings of her lovers' friends at her house. But perhaps the greatest distinction we must make here between kept women and courtesans is that the courtesans were personages. They were indeed what we call today celebrities, friends of kings, regents, emperors, statesmen, financiers, famous writers and painters, and the constant subject of columns printed in weekly journals, gossip about their romances, what they wore, what jewels they wore, and what they did were a continual fodder for public curiosity. And many famous writers also put them as characters in their stories. Our next courtesan is Cora Pearl. She's one of the many famous courtesans, and I wish I could talk about all of them in one night, but it's not possible. In the glamorous and brittle world of the Second Empire, no one glittered more than in the demi-monde than the English courtesan named Cora Pearl. Cora was born Emma Elizabeth Crouch in Plymouth, England, around 1835. When Emma was young, her father deserted the family and moved to America. Emma's mother told the children that their father had died and promptly found a lover to help support the family. Emma and her new stepfather did not get along, so she and her sisters were sent to a convent school in Burgundy, France, where she learned French and deportment. After her schooling was done, Emma moved in with her grandmother in London and went to work for a milliner. What happened next sounds like something out of a bad movie, but Emma claimed that one day she came out of church to find that her maid had disappeared. She was approached by a man who offered to buy her, quote, cakes. Not suspecting that he had ulterior motives, young, naive Emma followed him to a gin palace where she got a lot more from him than just cakes. In the morning, he left her with a 5-pound note. Having lost her virginity, Emma couldn't go back to her grandmother's house and felt her only other option was prostitution. Her luck changed when she made the acquaintance of Robert Bignell, owner of a popular dance hall where many of London's demi-monde were congregated. She became his mistress, and when he took her to Paris, she fell in love with the city and stayed when he returned to England. She took the name of Cora Pearl just because she liked the way it sounded. Cora went through a string of men in Paris, and by 1860, she was one of the most celebrated courtesans in Paris. She moved up the ladder and made the acquaintance of the Duc de Rivoli, a man that she called the first link in her golden chain of lovers. He was handsome and courteous, and during their relationship, which lasted 6 years, he showered her with money, jewels, servants, and a chef. Cora had a string of lovers, including the Prince of Orange, the heir to the throne of the Netherlands, who gave her a string of black pearls, which she was often photographed in. And here they are. It was said that her jewels alone were worth at least 1 million francs, and her clothes were made by Charles Frederick Worth, the famed couturier. Although she wasn't conventionally beautiful, people noted her tiny waist and her beautiful bosom. But more important than her looks was her spirit. Cora knew how to have fun and be spontaneous. She knew how to throw a party. When fireworks were all the rage in Paris, Cora had the best and the brightest. She also had a way of flattering a man without sounding like she was trying to. To set herself apart from the other courtesans, she became renowned for her skill with horses and owned about 60 of them, as well as a fleet of expensive carriages into which rides in the park during the peak hours. It was Cora who started the fashion for courtesans to take carriage rides in the Bois de Boulogne every day to be seen in their fine clothes and jewelry. Cora also knew how to spend money, and she once spent 30,000 francs in 2 weeks, which then was a veritable fortune. She dressed creatively with the intent to provoke either shock or awe, and was known for dyeing her hair bold colors. She was certainly ahead of her time, and was seen once riding out in her carriage, her hair the color of a lemon, dyed to match the carriage's yellow satin interior. She once appeared in a blue gown, and her dog's coat was colored blue to match her wardrobe. She wore quite a bit of makeup and face powder tinted with silver or pearl to give her skin a shimmering translucence. Jean-Philippe Worth, the son of the courtier Worth, pronounced her shockingly overdone. And in 1867, a drink came into vogue inspired by Pearl, dubbed the Tears of Cora Pearl. Someone wrote a tribute to her which said, "You are today, madame, the renown, the preoccupation, the scandal, and the toast of Paris. Everywhere they talk of you." Cora made her theatrical debut in Offenbach's opera Orpheus in the Underworld, playing the role of Cupid. She made her entrance in a costume that seemed to consist solely of strategically placed diamonds. The soles of her boots were also covered in diamonds as well. They were later auctioned off. Critics were kind, but Cora only performed 12 times before she retired from the stage. Cora's love life could not be neglected, and when her current lover, Prince Napoleon, exiled abroad, she turned her attentions to Alexandre Duval, a man 10 years younger, whose family wealth was established in hotels and restaurants. He indulged her as much as he could and was famed for writing the following words. I'm sorry. "Will you let me prove my devotion? Command me and I will die." To which the object of his attentions replied, "I would rather you lived and paid my bills." Too soon he had spent every franc he owned, and when Cora turned her back on him, Duval attempted to commit suicide. He did recover, but her lack of pity for him made people turn against her in Paris. When hissed and jeered in public, Cora took herself off to tour Europe, though in London she was further shamed when asked to leave the Grosvenor Hotel, and in Baden she was not allowed to enter the gaming room. Oddly enough, today the Grosvenor has a Cora Pearl suite with a beautiful portrait of her over it, and she would have laughed to have seen that. Cora returned to Paris, but life was never the same again. Prince Napoleon was back and had no desire to see her. She was forced to sell her jewels and possessions, and was 10 years later found renting rooms in the back streets of Paris, ravished by age and sickness. When she died of cancer in 1886 at the age of 51, the event went all but unnoticed. She was destined for a pauper's grave, but that final humiliation was spared when an unnamed gentleman intervened and paid for Cora's resting place to be in a Paris cemetery in the style of the grandest courtesan. Our next courtesan is Caroline Otero, who was born in Iglesias, Spain in 1868. She was a dancer, actress, and courtesan. She came from an impoverished family, and as a child, she worked as a maid. At 14, she left home with her boyfriend and dancing partner, Paco, and began working as a singer and dancer in Lisbon. She found a sponsor. I think I skipped a picture again. Yes. She found a sponsor in Barcelona who moved with her to Marseille in order to promote her dancing career in Paris. She soon left him and created the character of La Belle Otero, fancying herself as an Andalusian gypsy. By 1889, she'd worked her way to Paris, where she joined the Folies Bergère, the famous music hall, catering to popular taste and offering a lot of semi-nudity. At the age of 21, she was somewhat old by comparison to most Folly stars. In her second Folly season, she gained instant notoriety with her new self-designed stage act. She had worked hard in the decade after she left Barcelona and had acquired much wealth, most of it in the form of jewels, precious gems, and pearls. With the help of the famed author Colette, she created a wardrobe of outlandish costumes that included diamond brassiers and pearls. Men ogled her and the women were jealous. And by the way, for anybody who's ever seen the movie Gigi, that was based on a book by Colette, and Colette was friendly with Otero, and that's how she had an intimate knowledge of courtesans, which is what the movie is about. I saw the movie when I was about 7 years old, and it wasn't until recently that it dawned on me it was about a courtesan. Otero's impact on her audience was captured by the publisher of Figaro in a review the day after her debut. We have seen quite a few things in Paris, but we had to wait until she came to see this. A woman with Andalusian eyes of which the poet speaks, blood red lips, a magnificent head of wavy raven black hair, are rearing up and throwing her head back like a young thoroughbred. The gyrations of her hips and legs drove the public crazy. She is loaded with jewels like an idol, diamonds, rubies, and emeralds. Otero was known to own several exquisite necklaces, one that had belonged to the Empress Eugenie, one that had belonged to the Empress of Austria, and one that belonged to Leonide Leblanc, the mistress of King Louis Philippe's son. She also received from the King of Serbia a diamond Bolero created just for her by Cartier out of 10 million francs worth of jewels set in gold frame with 30 large diamonds hanging at the end like huge tears, and a pair of diamond ropes, each glistening with 20 stones, secured at the center with a large diamond clasp. During her stage career, it was kept in the vaults of the Crédit Lyonnais and brought out only on special occasions, carried in an armored truck and guarded by 2 armed policemen. These are 2 sculptures I came across, which are depictions of her dancing. Her fans, and there were many of them, jammed concert halls and theaters to see her, much the same as teenagers today flock to see their rock star heroes. But the press was not as kind to Miss Otero as the public. She was accused of being the lover of no less than 6 crowned heads of state, including King Edward of England and Tsar Nicholas of Russia. Similar accusations were leveled at the kings of Spa and Serbia, the Grand Duke Peter, and the Duke of Westminster. It is a fact that at least 2 men fought a duel over her and another committed suicide because of her rejection of his advances. Her love affairs made her famous and the envy of most notable personalities. It was news when she was spotted in public. And she had a kind of a famous rivalry going with Leanne de Pougy, the person I showed you before. Her pearls were stolen. So they tried to outdo each other in public all the time. And this is an interesting picture. Until I blew it up, I didn't quite realize where the pearls were hanging. They're not coming straight down in front of her. They're sort of over one breast. Jean Cocteau said the following about her. I saw Otero at dinner last night. It wasn't exactly an underdressed affair. She was swathed in whalebone, silk girdles, suspenders, gaiters, gloves, corsets, halters of pearls, covered with feathers and velvet and satin belts. Her hair was piled up, she wore false eyelashes and was covered in a variety of brooches, Egyptian and Japanese, and furs of sable. In truth, she was harnessed more than dressed. This bosomy soubrette, it seemed to me, had as much chance of getting out of these clothes as an oyster from its shell. To undress her would be a costly enterprise, which I can only compare to moving the house with all its belongings. And legend has it, legend has it that the cupolas at the top of the Carlton Hotel in Cannes, France, are actually inspired by her breasts that were so popular with the public. The most startling display of wealth was when she and Leanne de Pougy would come to Maxime's, the place where most courtesans dined, and they would try to outdo each other with jewelry. And this is a picture of her with her maid, and you can see she's wearing an awful lot of jewelry in this picture. Although she accumulated a massive fortune over the years, about $25 million, she gambled away most of it, visiting Monte Carlo often. She lived out the end of her life in poverty until she died of a heart attack in 1965 at the age of 97 in her one-room apartment. As a neighbor said of Otero's last days, she was constantly talking about her past, and I was not listening anymore. It was always the same: feasts, princes, champagne. Of her heyday in career, Otero once said, "Women have one mission in life, to be beautiful. When one gets old, one must learn how to break mirrors. I am very gently expecting to die. Her book, My Blue Notebooks, was published in English in 1979. So I'm just going to quickly mention a few other courtesans of the time. We can't go into detail, but this is Sarah Bernhardt, the famous actress, who was also a courtesan. She was the illegitimate daughter of a seamstress and courtesan. And when she was young, she had a child out of wedlock and yet became one of the most famous actresses and women of all time. She was also a talented sculptor who slept in a coffin and kept exotic animals as pets. She's important in jewelry history because she supported René Lalique. And Lalique's jewelry was so over the top and so large that most women wouldn't be seen wearing it in the street, but she would. So she had him design jewelry for her plays, which we see here, and also for her personally. Lalique made this gorgeous pendant for her. This is a character that she played in one of her plays, La Princesse Fontaine, of enamel diamond and 18-karat gold. And in this picture, I think she's probably wearing several Lalique pieces, at one time. And she was known for her frizzy hair, which I can relate to. But she was also a supporter of Alphonse Mucha, and he designed jewelry for her, and pieces were executed by somebody else. And she met him when he designed a poster for one of her plays, and she was so happy with the poster that she went on to have him design jewelry like this, which is my absolute favorite. There were many other famous courtesans of this time frame, enough probably to fill several lectures. This is Mata Hari. Mata Hari was a Dutch-born exotic dancer and escort, executed by the French in 1917 on the charge of spying for Germany during World War I. Oops, sorry. And Coco Chanel, although we don't think of her as a courtesan, was able to create a business through the generosity of men in her life. And her brand, of course, had jewelry included in it. I'm sorry, I'm a very dry throat. The age of the courtesan was over by the first few decades of the 20th century in France, but the stories of these women linger on. Here we are talking about them. They had to make the best of what they could get while they could. Some lived comfortably for the rest of their lives, and some were poor when their looks faded. Men were no longer interested in them. Something the sculptor Rodin seemed to understand, as this sculpture is known as the Old Courtesan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Elyse.
My pleasure.
You all can unmute now.